iOS 6. In 2011, Steve Jobs passed away, and with him so did the classic era of Apple. iOS 6 is the last software iteration of that era, with its skeuomorphic design and focus on performance and functionality over all else. Hey, how's it going? I'm Josh from 91 Tech, and today we're going to be taking a look at 2012's iOS 6 and how it holds up over 6 years later. Technically, it isn't quite 2019 yet, but we're super close, so I'm going to call this 2019 for the video. I don't think iOS 6 is going to change much in the next couple days. But before we get started here, we do have to talk about today's sponsor. Today's video has been sponsored by Dr. Phone. Dr. Phone lets you fix over 100 iTunes errors and issues with ease, as well as no data loss. You can get 10% off right now with coupon code SENJC. Dr. Phone is compatible with all iTunes versions, including the latest, and so make sure you go check them out. Big thanks to Dr. Phone for sponsoring this video, and now we'll get right back into talking about iOS 6. This here is the iPhone 5 running iOS 6.0.1. The 5 is pretty hard to find on iOS 6 and it can be quite expensive, but I got pretty lucky and found it for like $70 on eBay a year ago. If you have the iPhone 4S or certain models of the iPad 2, you can downgrade to iOS 6, which is pretty cool, but unfortunately you can't with any other device. You could always dual boot with Cool Booter on basically any device that ever ran iOS 6, assuming you're jailbroken, but that's a subject for another day. For now, we're going to take a look at iOS 6 as is and see how it holds up in 2019. And it holds up surprisingly well, at least in some areas. Obviously, the most noticeable aspect of iOS 6 is the old design. It looks much different than anything we see nowadays. Everything now is very flat, but iOS 6 has character and a more realistic tone that I really enjoy. Regardless, it certainly looks old, and Apple had to move on with the times eventually, as much as I love this design. First off, we have the old slide to unlock when you open the phone, which I love. And do you remember this sound? Oh man, it's beautiful, and I miss it so much. I think. I mean, it's just a lock sound, but still, it just triggers some old memories somewhere stored in my brain for some reason. Anyways, iOS 6 is significantly different from what we have now, and that extends to most of its apps. The music app, for example, is really different. iOS 6 actually gave the music app a rework over iOS 5, and I love it. It feels a lot cleaner and easier to use than iOS 12's music app, and has a dark theme to it, which is great. Seriously, this is really nice, especially when you're like laying in bed at night, putting on some music. I hate the glaring white glow from my iPhone XS. This is much better. The iTunes and App Stores also got a makeover from iOS 5 and look much better than they did in 2011. It doesn't look modern, but it doesn't look nearly as old as iOS 5 either. It's kind of an odd in-between, and it's too bad this was only around for a year. Actually, iOS 6 has quite a few design changes from iOS 5, and I never really thought about this or knew why it was, but I do have a theory now. I think if Steve Jobs hadn't passed, Apple would have doubled down on the skeuomorphic design and kept using it for at least a couple years. I think it's typically accepted that things would be a lot different under Jobs than Cook, but I hadn't actually realized how much iOS 6 changed things in terms of design from iOS 5. It looks much better, and I think all these little redesigns were setting it up for a similar looking iOS 7, at least until Tim Cook took over. I could be completely wrong, and probably am, but regardless of whatever the original plan was, I think the redesign of iOS 7 was a good thing. iOS was kind of feeling stale back in the day and needed a refresh. Even today, iOS 7 has the highest adoption rate of any iOS version ever. Apple needed a change, and while there were many problems with iOS 7, it's still what they needed at the time to keep their consumer base interested in what they had. While there were a few design changes in iOS 6, one of my favorite things about the software is how focused it is. It puts functionality and performance over all else, and tries to provide the best user experience possible, not the prettiest. It does a good job too, as iOS 6 is probably the fastest iOS has ever felt, except for maybe iOS 12. Seriously though, any device that can run iOS 6 does it like a champ. Everything feels fast. Looking at iPhones specifically, we have 4 devices all performing extremely well despite the age of the older models. The iPhone 3GS is surprisingly fast and absolutely usable. The iPhone 4 4 is completely spiffy, the 4S is crazy fast, and the 5 is about as seamless as it gets. There are a surprisingly large amount of parallels between iOS 6 and iOS 12. There's a phone that got an extra version of software and is still very usable, check, with the 3GS and 5S. The update is more oriented towards performance and looks similar to the predecessor, check. iOS 12 is the best piece of software we've seen from Apple in a very long time, perhaps even since iOS 6. It's really that good, and so is iOS 6. Not everything is perfect with it, although it comes pretty darn close. Apple Maps is the thing, replacing Google Maps as the default mapping software, and while it's not so bad anymore, in 2012 it was absolutely awful. If you've ever heard Apple Maps are terrible, it's because of the worthy reputation it garnered in its first couple years. The old YouTube app is also gone. You might remember it on iOS 5 with the classic old TV icon. While it's a bit unfortunate and a lot of people loved it, you could still at least download Google's version from the App Store, although it doesn't seem terribly reliable and has crashed on me a fair few times. Actually using iOS 6 in 2019 is about as difficult as you would expect. Basic things like texting and whatnot isn't too bad as the phone is really fast, I can do email pretty well, I can do most things pretty well, but the biggest issue is that app support is severely lacking here. You can in the very least download old compatible versions of apps, so you can use old Twitter and Instagram and so on. It's surprisingly not awful, but sometimes there are some weird issues, like in Twitter you still only have 140 characters, and in Instagram, since pictures all used to be the same size and square, they can be cut off when viewing them. Also, you can't see stories, which is annoying. There are a few games here and there that are still supported, like Temple Run, Angry Birds, or Fruit Ninja, so that was kind of neat. All these games are games that came out around the time of iOS 6, or that old era anyways, so that's why they're supported. Actually, it's kind of funny how fast these games fell into obscurity after being such a big deal back in the day. I really never think about any of them anymore, but I used to love them and play them all the time when I was younger. Oh, and before I see comments about it, no, you can't run Fortnite in iOS 6, sorry. This is all good and fun, but the real question is, could you live on iOS 6? Well, if you had to, yes, as your phone will still function as a phone. Put a SIM card in there and I mean it works. iMessage seems to work okay for me. I've heard of some people having issues, but my phones are working fine even on new activations, so I'm not sure what exactly that's all about. Again, even email's okay. You could use Apple's default app, I'd imagine that would work fine, but personally I've never liked it, so I downloaded an old version of Gmail and it's fine. It's usable, but why? Why would you want to live on iOS 6? Other than nostalgia, there's really no reason to, as much as I wish that weren't the case. I love the classic design, but iOS 12 is just much better. I'd be curious to see what a reworked 2019 version of iOS would be with this design, but unfortunately that'll never happen because Apple likes to take away options, not give more. I love iOS 6, but using it in 2019 is more of a chore than a luxury. There are too many runarounds and headaches. It isn't the fault of the software itself, as there weren't any of these headaches in 2012, but the age of it. It's obsolete, as most 6-year-old software is at this point, especially smartphone software. It's actually impressive how well it holds up when you consider how much things have changed since iOS 6. I mean, look at the iPhone now compared to the iPhone then. It's a completely different machine, and there has been some exponential growth in the hardware. And yet, iOS 6 still flies, runs well, and can even do most basic tasks in 2019. That's impressive to me, and it speaks to the quality of Apple stuff, at least from back in the day. iOS 6 is always going to be considered iconic simply because it's the last of the old design and Steve Jobs' era. It was fast, fluid, smooth, functional, and perhaps the best experience we'll ever see on an iPhone. And while it's easy to look back and wish we could have what we once did, we should try to appreciate how solid iOS 12 is right now. Apple actually listened to their user base last year and improved things. iOS 11 was a buggy mess, but 12 performs really strongly, and I'm very glad for that. Apple might have their problems, especially with pricing right now, but software, at the moment, I don't think you can really beat them. All this being said, I miss iOS 6. It's fun to use in 2019 if nothing else, and unfortunately, I do think there is nothing else. Again, basics, maybe you could use it, but why would you want to? You can do so much more on newer phones now, and as much as I love this iPhone 5 on iOS 6, I'm pretty glad I have my XS. But what do you think of the old software? Do you like it better than what we have now? Make sure you leave your thoughts in the comments down below. I'm pretty curious here. A lot of people view iOS 6 nostalgically, so I look forward to into reading all of that. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this video interesting, maybe hit that like button and consider subscribing for more content just like this. You can follow me over on Twitter and Instagram at 91_tech. And with that, I'm Josh from 91 Tech, and I will see you all next time.